Man, I think I need to invest in a better chair. I think this one has had it. Probably like some of you have had it with me making these videos. But I'm going to continue to be that fly in the soup. With all seriousness, I make these, I make these statements, not simply to be contrarian, but because I actually care about the lives of my own people. And I have particular views on how I think the lives of my people can be improved. And I have criticisms of other people's ideas of how they think that they can improve the lives of my people. One thing I wanted to bring to light today, alhamdulillah, I had a really wonderful conversation with a friend of mine just a few minutes ago that helped to kind of make a little bit more concrete, which is, we were discussing, the issue of, of course, the protests and the other things. And we were discussing how, Malcolm, may Allah have mercy on him, had incredible insight into one of the real enemies of black folks, right? When you talk about Black Lives Matter, right? Was liberalism, and in particularly the white liberal who wants to, who can gain proximity to the black community by speaking in a certain way that has the connotation or can give the feeling of being concerned, but in reality works against the health of black psychology and true empowerment and emancipation for black folks. So we were talking about Malcolm and that, and I said, it's amazing. One of the things that liberalism, and particularly in its white form, it has convinced. Actually, let me correct that. I think both American white liberalism and conservatism both have equally convinced black people in some ways that they have been nothing other than victims. And I do believe that the liberal aspect only wants to perpetuate this, whereas in some ways it feels like conservatism wants to taunt us over that. And of course, Allah has said in his book, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي Adam. We have ennobled Bani Adam. All of the sons and daughters of Adam have been given nobility. And that's something that we have lost. And the rhetoric of liberalism coming from the left, coming from the white left, you can renew and you can reobtain your liberalism through the state and through these various apparatuses, so long as you basically adopt a psychology of victimization and victimology and having no agency. But Allah has said, we have ennobled all of the sons and daughters of Adam, and also, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change themselves. I say this not to berate us, actually, for not having changed, but actually to demonstrate the truthfulness of Allah's words and how we did this very same thing in our own fairly recent history. So wind the clock back to the Reconstruction era, right? So quick history lesson, there was a thing called slavery, and then there was a thing called the Civil War, and then there was a thing called Reconstruction, that period after the Civil War in which we received the Emancipation Proclamation, and supposedly we were freed from the bondage of slavery. Let's just put this at about the first marker in our timeline at about 1965. Now, let us just look at one area, right? Because one of the things that sometimes we, even as black people ourselves, we tend to think of ourselves as slaves and descendants of slaves. And certainly I am only 4 generations away from a person that was owned by another person. So on one part, that's true, but that is not the essence of who I am. And I want us to look at how amazing this is that we did once upon a time in recent history, not ancient history, right? We don't need to get Hotep on this one and go back to when we were supposedly all kings and queens in Egypt and in Africa, right? So many of us are familiar with a place called the Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that became to be known as so-called Black Wall Street, right? Black Wall Street was this place that, it had over 10,000 residents, and it was this beacon of post-slavery Reconstruction success of former slaves and their descendants building a new prosperous life. And what's important about this is a couple of points. One, this was done without the help of the government. This was done by them changing their condition within themselves. So this goes to the verse that I just recited in Allah's book. Secondly, it's important that we not only did we build this amazing thing called so-called Black Wall Street in Greenwood, in the Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Not only that we did that, but we did this. Rough approximations, the Greenwood District, Black Wall Street, was formulated somewhere around 1905, right? 1905. We were emancipated, so to speak, in 1865. So we went from being slaves, having no agency, and in a matter of 40 years, built a Black Wall Street that was actually, it was so successful that the reason why whites burned it down in 1921 is because of jealousy, right? We built something so amazing with our bare hands, just literally out of the shackles of slavery, with nothing but our hands and dirt, and built this in a matter of 40 years. And the reason why I mention this is not just to give us a sense of historical pride about we haven't always just been worthless, right? And that we also have never just not had any agency. But then let's contrast the condition of the black community 40 years after civil rights. When we look at what happened in the 60s, and then all of the rights and legislation that we got, but then we look at those important metrics, yes, that are brought up by Thomas Sowell and Larry Elder. I have no love for Larry Elder. The data, unfortunately, cannot be argued with. That we started with more than what we started with in 1865. But the condition of our community was worse off than what we had 40 years just out of shackles. This is a truth that has to be contended with if we want to deal with the lives of black people. And I say this to black folks, black Muslims, non-black Muslims. This is why I've been going off on this tangent, that I know everybody wants to have this moment of self-congratulation. Hey, we're finally involved. And some people are saying, why are you saying we've been involved? And that's not true. That's like saying some of my friends are black. It goes without saying that there have been Muslims involved, but by and large, I'm not talking about individual upright people. Of course, there are always salihun in every time, but the bulk of the Muslim community has been absent in this matter. And by that, I don't only just mean immigrant Muslims. Undoubtedly, particularly in the way that black American Muslims, especially I would say in the Midwest and especially in the East Coast, that were socialized through Salafiyah, and I say as somebody who came through Salafiyah and still have a lot of admiration for Salafiyah, we were actually conditioned to no longer care about our own people. So number one, stop being defensive, stop trying to erect but, and I, and we. Listen to the criticism instead of becoming so hyper-defensive that you act as if I'm saying that everything that Muslims have done, particularly, let's say, immigrant Muslims, is completely worthless, right? And I have gone on public record of saying Despite whatever shortcomings immigrant Muslims have had, let's also be honest, particularly coming from a Black American Muslim experience. If it wasn't for them, most of us wouldn't have nowhere to pray. And I say that as an imam of middle ground that was not founded by, right, I'm the imam of middle ground, but let's keep it real. It was founded in conjunction, particularly financially, with some so-called immigrant Muslims. So again, stop jumping to conclusions. Stop getting so defensive about everything. You know, the vast majority of my teachers in Islam were so-called immigrants. My wife is an immigrant. So don't, just lower your guard so that we can have a beneficial conversation so that we can actually truthfully help with the condition of so-called Black people. If you really care about the lives of Black people, maybe you should listen to some of us. So me making these videos and pointing out some uncomfortable things is not to stick it to the immigrant Muslims, right? It is because I actually want our community overall to be better. And as one brother had actually commented, he's like, well, where were the Muslims, including the Black community of Muslims, where were you with the so-called war on terror? And that can certainly be a legitimate criticism that many of us were silent upon that. That's a legitimate criticism or question to raise. I'm not going to erect my defenses. Let's have a conversation about that, right? So all of what I'm saying here is for the purpose of fostering conversations. But yes, I use techniques that make us, where you can't quite find a comfortable place to sit, because it's through that comfort that circles back around to my original argument of why folks really have been broadly absent in this affair. So I hope that those of you that have taken exception to what I say will take a deep breath and go back and look again at what I'm saying and listen to these words and understanding I'm not here demonizing immigrant Muslims. I am here critiquing what has happened and presenting, like, for instance, what I just got through saying about what we as Black folks did just out of shackles in a matter of 40 years and built something the envy of America. We could easily do so again, but it's conditional upon Allah's word. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah doesn't change the condition of a people until they change themselves. The proof is when we did change ourselves, even when we weren't Muslim. And this is something that Ibn Kathir talks about, that Allah will in this life sometimes give success even to a non-Muslim due to them still being congruent with his word. So once upon a time in recent history, right, because I consider 1865 pretty recent history, right, our actions fell in congruence with the Quran, even though we were not Muslim, and Allah gave us success. And then in 1965, or thereabouts, of civil rights, our actions were not in congruence with his book, and therefore there was no success. And this is why I'm saying maybe some of you don't quite know our history, the psychologies that we are operating under, and perhaps you should lend an ear in throwing up your defenses so that we can truthfully bring about change and we can bring about benefit. So I pray that Allah will allow us to be like what the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Qayyis man dana nafsahu wa amila lima ba'da mawtihi. That the astute person is the one that will be willing to do self-criticism or perhaps receive criticism, right? And what works for what comes after death. وَلَا تَوْفِيقَ إِلَّا بِتَوْفِيقِ اللَّهِ. Of course, there is no success without the success of Allah. وَصَلَوَاتُهُ وَالسَّلَامُهُ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ الْكَرِيمِ وَعَلَى آلِهِ وَصَحْبِهِ أَجْمَعِينَ وَالْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ.